Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on the pros and cons of sustainability certification. I'm Molly Hughes with Softly Solutions. Today, we will be speaking with Dr. James Hagan with the University of Pennsylvania. If you're with a business making strides in sustainability, you're not going to want to miss this one. In the past, businesses would get sustainability certifications, also known as Ecolabels, primarily to bolster consumer trust or customer trust. But today, there is just so much more at stake. Ecolabels are now the basis for qualification for new retail and government programs that increase product visibility and market access. If you aren't familiar with these opportunities, you're going to want to reach out to us at Softly. We have the details on these programs, and we help both businesses and their ESG consultants find the best certifications to optimize their return on their investment in sustainability. So we also have a library of webinars, each featuring a different sustainability certification, such as Safer Choice, EWG Verified, GOTS, Leaping Bunny, and more. These webinars can be found on our website. Okay, so today, rather than diving into a specific certification, what we're going to do is we're going to look at sustainability certifications as a whole. What are the pros and what are the cons of verifying your sustainability claims through certification? So at this time, I would like to bring on today's special guest, Dr. James Hagan. This guy has a lot of credentials associated with his name and has been a driving force in sustainability in the entire industry. But most notably, university students are very fortunate to have him on staff at the University of Pennsylvania. I also want to add that Softly is pleased to have Dr. Hagan as an advisor for our company. So welcome to the webinar, Dr. Hagan.
Thank you, Molly. I appreciate the opportunity. And please call me Jim.
Okay, Jim. Thank you so much. I would like to start by touching on sustainability in general. How do you define sustainability?
I think in general, the word is used to have a connotation that indicates you can do something without end. But for us, certainly for me, it really boils down to making sure we can continue and preserve human life on the planet. Mm-hmm. That is the key and the big issue. Now, Gro Harlem Brundtland essentially put it much more delicately by saying that we'd like to live today in a way that does not adversely affect future generations' ability to meet their needs. But it's a very serious issue. It's the existential problem that we have to face as a global society.
Yeah. And I think on the slide right now, that bottom line really sets it out perfectly. People do wish to be part of that solution, right? And when I say people, I mean both consumers and businesses. And as a result, businesses started voluntarily getting their products validated by a third party so they can convey the good things that they're doing with their consumers. So now what I'd like you to do is tell me a little bit about these validations or these certifications.
Well, certainly what happens is various organizations set standards that essentially meet the broad needs of sustainability, both the environmental, the social, and economic issues, and the impacts that companies have and the products that they generate have. Now, in terms of the sustainability of a product, it's not just the end use of that product, but you want to look completely at the life cycle of the product, everything from extraction to supply, manufacturing, use, and then end of life. Do we dispose of it in a linear fashion, or are we trying to recover it and create a circular economy that allows those resources to continue to be reused?
Yeah. And you can see some of the logos or these eco labels associated with certifications on the bottom of the screen. So Professor Hagan, we are going to reverse roles right now, and you are going to be Professor Hagan, or I'm going to be Professor Hughes, I guess. And I have a little pop quiz for you. Just a little trivia. Do you happen to know what year the first set of voluntary standards for a product sustainability certification was released?
Well, in terms of, I suppose the true answer is I don't. But in terms of the evolution, clearly we saw concerns broadly about the environment with ISO back in the 50s. But
Mhm.
in the 70s, clearly in Europe, mostly in Scandinavia, there were a lot of environmental certifications. They looked at their products. It didn't really evolve to sustainability type certifications probably until this century. And
Yeah,
that was been a gradual evolution, and we continue to proceed with um, that resolution and that clarification, I think, for a lot of different situations. So by no means is it a static situation.
yeah, yeah. Hey, pretty good on your pop quiz. So I did just a very unofficial investigation. And it showed, and I'm sure there's people in the audience that may know more about this, so feel free to chime in if you'd like in the chat. But 1978 was when the first sustainability certification was released. And you had mentioned that you thought maybe it was Scandinavia, but my research shows that it was in Germany. And it is their Blue Angel certification, which is actually still in play today. So, like I said, this was just a quick internet search. So, if anybody knows any differently, please let us know. And also, on kind of that note, if anybody's watching and has a question for us, please put it in the chat, and we promise to get to those. So, one other question for your pop quiz: do you know how many sustainability certifications are available today?
Oh my goodness, I don't know exactly. I think they're well over 500, but I haven't counted them up.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Most of the research shows around 450. But if you actually look at certifications, so when certifications started, like you had said, they kind of started environmentally focused only. And then they have grown to being more all sustainability focused, meaning that they're looking at social issues, fair trade. So certifications such as, the minority owned business certification or a women owned business certification, having those makes those numbers even higher. So we're looking at well over 450. Then you can look at also every state or country level has, numerous of those kind of certifications. So there are just hundreds and hundreds to pick from. We went to 0 to 45, 450 that are really recognized in 45 years. So it went pretty quickly, and it's really a lot to go through, which really
Yeah,
brings
I
us
think you make a very good point. I mean, usually we think of sustainability in more comprehensive fashion. We look at something that's environmental, social, and economic. But many of the certifiers essentially take an element of sustainability and focus just on that, whether it be diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether it be animal rights, whether it be building issues, whether it be climate change. All of those essentially have different niches that different certifiers will pursue.
Mhm.
But so again, I think it's sometimes a very broad topic in
It
terms of
is.
how
It
they
is.
capture it.
We'll talk a little bit about life cycle analysis, and you had mentioned it. Looking at everything having to do sustainability in the product, but there's certainly a lot that are there are these niche certifications. So, like I said, it kind of brings us to what we're talking about today. How do businesses decide if they should or should not get their product certified? And then how do they really make sense of it all? So Jim has written a white paper on this topic. It's called The Pros and the Cons of Sustainability Certification. And here is the list we're going to put up in just a second of the advantages of getting a certification. We are going to spend about the next 15 minutes or so talking through these pros or these advantages. Then we'll move on to the disadvantages. So, starting now, let's go with pro. Certification number one on your list is consumer awareness. We had mentioned it was in the 80s that businesses started using sustainability as a selling point to really bolster consumer awareness. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it is number one because it really becomes key and critical. You want to make sure that you communicate what you're doing to consumers, what standards you're able to meet. You do that through certifications. You want to educate consumers in terms of the issues that I think face society on a global basis. And you clearly want to encourage them to essentially take a more proactive role in terms of the things they can do. And certainly one of the things they can do is shop more effectively for sustainable products.
Yeah, yeah. And making it easier is really key. Number two on your list is transparency and trust.
Yeah, I think that one you want to make sure again to identify what's important for consumers. They don't have the time to do the research, And so therefore, they need to have some issues explained to them. They need to have some representation that work has been done behind the scenes. And they have to have some level of trust so that they can understand and act on the issues that they would like to in terms of the products they buy.
Yeah, yeah. Really embrace your excuse me, your transparency and honesty, without being, still staying humble and staying true to what you're really doing. I think that's important. Next, you have improved environmental standards, and I'm going to kind of link that with improved environmental performance. So, if you want to talk on both of those a little bit.
Sure. I mean, this creates a situation where, in order to attain these certifications, you're incentivizing companies to pursue it, whether they're going to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, use more renewable energy, minimize their waste, and use sustainable materials. All of those things are going to be issues that they need to consider. So, therefore, having a certification creates a bit of an incentive, a push, if you will, for companies to continue what hopefully they already are going to embrace.
Yeah, exactly. Consumer confidence is an advantage for getting a sustainability certification.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly important, especially for those consumers who are willing to pay for more sustainable products. They need to have some level of confidence that the certification that they're looking at and the product they're looking to buy has indeed gone through a very strict scrutiny and has a level of performance that they feel comfortable essentially making part of their life.
Yeah, yeah. Next on your list, Jim, you have competitive market advantage as being a good thing that a sustainability certification can bring to your product.
Yeah, this is analogous to what happens with investors. Investors are looking for companies that essentially are embracing sustainability, not just for altruism, but because it's better for the product. In terms of competitive market advantage, hopefully both consumers will see the benefit of that. And also, we see companies and consumers understand the sustainable product by using less materials, using renewable energy, not having an adverse effect socially, is going to essentially have a lower footprint globally. And therefore, they're willing to buy that product. And that, in turn, gives that company and gives that product advantage. They can grab more of market share than they otherwise might.
Yeah, certainly a competitive advantage. And then next on the list, you have our retail sustainability programs, which really kind of give that competitive advantage, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have, organizations such as Amazon's Climate Pledge Friendly and Wayfair's Shop Sustainably, that allows essentially different companies to essentially partner with those companies to make sure that they can provide those platforms that allow consumers to buy from their retail shops.
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah.
therefore, having that partnership of both companies, products, and retail organizations is quite important.
Yeah. So, kind of on that note, this is something we at Softly do a lot with. So, I kind of want to show you something, and show everybody actually. So, here is a list in the background. You can see 90 different eco labels. These are some of the most well known ones that are out there on the market right now and well respected. The ones that are in color that you can see right here, they are the certifications. There are about 54 of them, I believe, that are brought into Amazon's Climate Pledge Friendly program. So if your product has one of these certifications that are in color, they will automatically get this Climate Pledge Friendly badge. And the benefit of that is they have done quite a bit of research, and there is 10% higher views on the pages that have the Climate Pledge Friendly badge. So it's really important when you're looking at what certification a product, to get for your product. If you're a seller on Amazon, and there's quite a few, certifications that are similar, you're going to want to look at ones that are specifically on the Amazon list. Now, where it gets really complicated and confusing is what Walmart also has a program. So here we just change the screen, and you can see this one's Walmart. The ones in color now are the ones on Walmart's Built for Better program. So they're bringing in a different group of certifications. Some of them overlap, Some of them don't. Then you go to Wayfair. They have their own program. Once again, the ones in color are the ones brought into Wayfair's program, but they're not always the same ones that are on Walmart's or on Amazon. Some of them may be, some of them won't be. So really, I really encourage everybody you have to do a lot of research to figure out where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck from a investment standpoint when it comes to sustainability certifications. And then before we kind of go off this, I know we're going to be talking about government also, but the government also very heavily relies on the use of Ecolabels to get into their different programs. So the General Service Administration, they have their whole list to get on their green procurement program. So anyway, I think it's just important for everybody to know that you really have to do your research when it comes to these certifications these days. Okay, let's move on. Let's go to number 8 on your list, which is supply chain management.
Yeah, clearly what's been happening is companies recognize that a huge aspect of their footprint, whether it be climate change or overall sustainability, is really in their supply chain. There's also been a lot of unfortunate incidents with the supply chain where problems that are developed resonate back to the final company that buys those supplies. So it becomes important, and we've seen that sustainability has augmented issues around quality, issues around cost, and therefore it's become a major driver in terms of how companies view sustainability and how certifications literally are going to also rely on what's happening in the supply chain. They're not just going to look at the product, they'll look at how responsible companies have been with their suppliers.
Yeah, exactly. And, they're looking back. So kind of talking about certifications still, there's certifications that go down to the ingredient level that sometimes you have to get in that initial stage before you even go into, manufacturing and putting together the product. Then there's that final product sustainability certification. So all those kind of trickle in together. And what's interesting is, in the supply chain, there's also the procurement programs and the purchasing programs, which also rely heavily on certification. Because, what it comes down to is they can't spend time looking at every single ingredient. So what they do is they rely on the certifiers and getting a certain certification. They say, okay, we know that certification makes sure that it doesn't have, the harmful ingredients that we want in products. So that's kind of how all these certifications have evolved over time.
Yeah, and it'll go back, if I could, it'll go back to extraction. So it's not just the supply chain. It literally goes right back to where materials are taken from the earth. Mm-hmm. And on the point, both on the supply chain and the issue of competitive advantage, Walmart got involved, I think initially. I had an opportunity to talk with Lee Scott, a former CEO at Walmart. And he essentially said, we did it because we needed to burnish our image. But what they found was that by adopting sustainability principles, they were able to look at, again, opportunities to reduce materials, improve performance, reduce energy consumption. And so therefore, they found a much more aggressive program, not just for altruism, but for real business benefit advantage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how it's changed. I think people in the past looked at it and thought, it's going to be more expensive and but I should do the right thing I don't really want to. But now I think businesses are approaching it as not only is it the right thing to do, but it's also, it's going to help in the long run. And in the long run, it's going to save you time, save you money, get more, customers using it, and you're doing good things for the world and for, for our environment. Next on our list, level the playing field.
Well, what happens, of course, it's hard on both sides, both for consumers and for companies, to really be able to understand what's happening. So the certifications, essentially by setting certain standards, you're having a situation for whether it's a large company or a mid-sized company, they're going to meet those same standards. And so therefore, there is some benefit, especially for the small to medium enterprise companies that don't necessarily always have the same resources to compete with the big ones. But these certifications at least acknowledge the work that's been done and the results they've been able to achieve.
Yeah, exactly. And we talked a little bit earlier about setting those environmental standards. So having those standards set does level the playing field. So you're comparing apples to apples a little bit more easily, or oranges to oranges. Next on your list of an advantage of getting a sustainability certification is government incentives.
Yeah, I think the incentives are out there. The government has seen this as in a very positive light. EPA has created the preferred purchasing program that essentially impacts the entire spectrum of government purchasing. So it's similar in a way to the old military specifications, mil-spec, that created a real demand and a real push for companies to comply with those. In the same way, having those certifications aid companies meeting the EPA's preferred purchasing program, and therefore allow them to enter into the market of government purchasing.
Yeah, yeah. So the EPA recently did an audit on sustainability certifications, and they encouraged all these certifiers to send their information in. And I know that there's some certification organizations on this webinar today. So hopefully they were involved in that audit, sent their information in, and they will use those certifications then to go toward their programs. But one of the big reasons they did it is because as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, there is money now being earmarked for sustainable products. And a lot of times it goes to the EPA. It's then funnels down to individual states. But they're using these eco-labels as a way for qualification for these different programs and incentives that are coming out. In the past, it seems like most of the incentives surrounded agriculture and agriculture products, but we're finding it now to move more into manufacturing. So it's going to be a fun space to kind of watch. So, one other reason to kind of stay in touch with Softly is because we try to stay in the loop of any kind of opportunities out there that we can funnel your way when it comes to, new incentives, whether it be on the federal level or the state level. Okay. Going down your list, we're in the final advantage that you have listed in your white paper. It is legal compliance.
Yeah, legal compliance probably falls more in the category of what happens in Europe. I mean, the EU has made certain requirements that will encourage certification, but it's coming, I think, in the US, and it is an issue that companies have to be aware of, especially if they're looking to sell globally. They need to make sure that they have the certifications that allow them to sell both in the EU and also on the global marketplace, because they are driving the agenda in many cases.
Yeah, exactly. ESG reporting is a big field right now also. So just keeping track of the information of what you're doing. Right now, most of it's voluntary reporting, but we had mentioned investors earlier. A lot of them are demanding that they get ESG reports and information sent to them. So whether it goes to the government level, our guess is it probably will, following what's going on in Europe. Okay, that's a great list. There's a lot of good reasons why to get a sustainability certification, but in fair balance, of course, we are also going to go through some of the cons or disadvantages. I do want to encourage anybody that has a question to put it into the chat, and we will make sure that we get to those. So on your con list, let's see, number 1, we have cost. Getting a certification can be expensive, right?
It's interesting. I have a graduate student looking at certifications now, and of course, he initially saw it all in the positive light, but we have to look at, if you will, some of the drawbacks. And one of the big drawbacks for companies is that it costs money to get these certifications. They can have good sustainability programs, but then they're going to have to make sure they gather the information, submit that information, and in some cases, there can be a pushback in terms of having an audit program or a secondary third-party reviewer that allow the certifying companies to feel comfortable about awarding their certification to a particular product.
Yeah. You know what? It can be costly. And we do a lot with different certification organizations. And what we kind of find out is the niche ones, that we had talked about, you're going to get a certification that certifies that you're gluten-free, let's say. And that's a good certification because, people that have a celiac or a gluten intolerance, they want to easily be able to know that that product is definitely gluten-free, right? But when you're going to get a life cycle analysis done on a product, you're talking about, some heavier lifting. That costs, more money to do so. So it's something that I also encourage everybody we talk to, as you're developing a product, start from the very beginning and make sure that everything's documented and you really think through everything that you're putting into that product, because it's a lot harder to go back, afterwards and change, a formulation. Okay, number 2 on your disadvantage of getting a certification is complexity.
Yeah, exactly. I guess the first hurdle is actually just trying to determine which one works
Mm-hmm.
best for your product.
Yep.
The process to do that sometimes can be time consuming and quite complex. And so you have to understand that it's not a simple matter just to find, again, over 400 or 500 different eco-labels. You have to essentially pick the one or the ones that work best for you. So therefore, companies have to look and research and analyze their results and find out how they can make that certification work for them, and also how they can comply with the requirements that are implicit in that certification.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a lot of work, I have to tell you. Um, first of all, there's so many out there to pick from. But then also that whole ESG landscape is changing all the time. Like we went over those retail programs. The certifications that are brought into those retail programs, they're not stagnant. It's not like, okay, we have got this program. These are the certifications. It's going to stay like this forever. They change it. They're going to reevaluate on a regular basis. The same thing with procurement programs that bring in, certifications. So it ends up being a lot to research. We talked to a company not too long ago that said, boy, we were trying to help get a business. It was a consultancy, a business get a certification. And, we spent about 3 weeks, hundreds of hours just doing the research into what certification to get. So once again, hate to always be plugging softly, but this is something we know a lot about. So, certainly we might want to reach out to make sure you don't spend $100,000 on a certification also just to find out it doesn't qualify you for some of the things that you wanted it to. Okay, next on the list, certification standards as being a disadvantage.
Yeah, again, there's a spectrum of different certifying bodies. And as I mentioned, some are very complex and some are very comprehensive. So you'll get a particular standard that looks to all of the aspects of sustainability, and you'll get some that'll take an element. And then beyond that, then there are levels of compliance. And so there
Mm-hmm.
has to be some understanding that there will be different outcomes and different requirements for different certifying bodies. And so therefore those standards are, quite a spectrum.
Yeah, spectrum. And, next on your list is actually lack of standardization.
Right.
And I think they kind of go together because,
Right.
it's hard to compare apples to apples anymore because there's so many out there and they're not
Yeah,
using
some
the
are
same.
very rigorous. Some require, as I said, literally a piece of paper to go in to get the certifying result. Others have site audits, site reviews, and annual inspections. And so it can be quite a range of different situations. And it's that lack of standardization that also creates question marks in the minds of the consumers.
Yeah, exactly. That list of 90, or, pick that slide we had showed earlier that had the 90 certifications on there. In most cases, those are the more rigorous, the ones that have, not only third-party verification, but regular audits. So that is something to keep in mind when you're getting a certification, that to really get the benefit, you're going to have to put in some work, and there's going to be audits, and you're going to be held accountable for what you say you're doing. Okay, next on your list is greenwashing. And I want to talk a little bit about that because you have this on the con list as a disadvantage of getting a certification, which frankly took me a little bit by surprise because I would think getting a third party validation would be the best way to combat greenwashing. So I would actually think that it is an advantage, and I think a lot of people would. So explain why you think a little bit differently.
Well, it gets back to my point before about lack of standardization. You can get a certification from an organization that looks good, but you might be driven by a company's marketing department. And some unscrupulous individuals or unscrupulous companies can push this in order to, again, get competitive market advantage, but really have nothing beneath it. They have no aspect that would indicate that they have any efforts to proceed on uh, achieving sustainable outcomes. So therefore, it's misleading, sometimes false claims, and it really does have the potential to undermine the overall program of sustainability certifications. Now, having said that, I have to recognize that there is sometimes a review by certain organizations, say environmental organizations, that will demand some level of perfection. And it has to be understood that companies are on a journey for sustainability. And so they might be starting down it without having necessarily achieved a particular endpoint. But as long as they can meet the requirements of the certifying body, recognizing there's more to do and more to come, I think that's a good thing. And we've seen that even with investor ratings. There are some companies that were able to get investor ratings, and they found that they were submitting false information. They were making false claims to the investors, which of course had repercussions. And the same thing's true here with clients. This is the one my students go completely crazy about. They see greenwashing in a lot of activities. And I would have to say that, in order to get the certifications, you have to recognize that once you put that up, you're probably going to be held to a higher level of scrutiny. And you need to be prepared for that, because it is important to be able to provide an adequate and transparent communication about what you're doing, as well as recognizing what more needs to be done.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. So I think kind of like on the non-certification level, when companies are making just claims saying we're recyclable, the ones that are up here, we're cruelty free, we're conscious, we're natural, we're eco, things like that, non-toxic. Those aren't certifications. Those are product claims, and those are ones that that I think consumers are a little bit more aware of, saying, hey, there's not even a certification behind that. They're making these claims, but I don't know if I can believe it. But, you're even talking about ones that, hey, maybe you got a certification, but it's kind of a not very valid certification, or there's not a whole lot of oversight for it. So once again, picking that right certification is important. And there are ones that are certainly, more reputable and better than the other ones. Yeah. All right. So going on from greenwashing, the next one you have on your list is limited scope as being a negative.
Well, we mentioned before that a lot of certifiers will take an element of sustainability and go for certification in that area. The downside is that particular element may be fine for a company or for a particular product. But what you find is the bigger problem looms in another component of the triple bottom line. So you might be able to do something very positive in social sustainability and get certified for that, only to have a situation where you haven't done a particularly good job in terms of your supply chain or your manufacturing or dealing with your extraction issues. And therefore, that comes back to essentially haunt you and undermine the credibility of consumers once they feel they've certified on this particular element, recognizing that there are other things that they need to essentially be aware of.
Right. You were just talking about that triple bottom line. You're talking about what, economic?
It's environmental, social, and economic. Exactly right.
Yep.
So all three of those have to essentially, be essentially in balance, be understood.
Yep, exactly. Okay, we are getting close to the end of your disadvantages of getting a certification. The last one on your list is lack of enforcement.
Yeah, what'll happen is that sometimes companies will go to certifying bodies, obtain their certification, and then take no further action, essentially stop right there. And some certifying bodies don't have a follow-through program, a follow-up, and there's no penalty for companies or products that violate their standards. So it's akin to greenwash. Essentially, there is a lack of progress in this area. And it encourages companies to obtain the certification and then just, if you will, stop dead in the tracks in terms of any future action they might take on greenhouse gas emissions, renewable energy, water issues, resource issues. All those things are vitally important, to say nothing of the social impacts. So there is a con in this regard. And, I think some certifying bodies have recognized that, and they will put in, again, audits or follow through reviews.
Mm-hmm.
But a number of them won't necessarily kick anyone off the list.
Yeah, those aren't the ones that you probably want to work with, right?
Right.
Okay, we do have a question from the audience. Some companies these days are now doing their own life cycle analysis because they don't want to spend the money necessarily for the certification, but they know that they're doing the right thing. So they make sure that along the way they're getting third-party, input into everything that's going into their products. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, a couple of thoughts on life cycle assessments. An LCA usually is done by the company, or if it's done by an organization, there's the potential for bias. I mean, I teach a course in life cycle assessment at Penn, and there are a lot of opportunities to essentially make some changes in the underpinning decisions that define the overall impact of that product. So usually what occurs is that they'll want them to be ISO certified. And by ISO certified, it means they have to meet certain requirements. They don't want to have subjectivity included into the reviews. And it's, again, but it's an element of sustainability. It's the environmental sustainability component that they look at. It's very detailed. It has great value for organizations. For in Europe, for environmental product declarations, they will require a life cycle assessment before they proceed with that. So it's a useful tool. And again, if it can be part and parcel of what a certifying body decides to look at, I think it's good. But they have to recognize that it needs to be in conformance and compliance with ISO.
Yeah. Good question. That was a good question. Okay, so we have gone through your entire list of pros and cons of sustainability certification. Do you have any final thoughts that will be helpful to our viewers?
Yeah, again, I think, there's a good slide. I think people have to understand.
You do have final thoughts.
Yeah, exactly right. They need to understand both the benefits, which there are many, but also some of the drawbacks, which is why I gave up both the pros and the cons. And also, I think it's very important that certifications be seen as just part of their overall strategy.
Yeah.
And it's a recognition of the good work they've done. And so in that sense, it can be very positive, but it's not a solution in of itself. And so therefore, it really is a reflection, I think, of the intent and the good efforts a company puts into making sure the products are moving in a sustainable way.
Right, exactly. Well, goodness, lots of great information. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. Once again, with us has been Dr. James Hagan with the University of Pennsylvania with a review of his white paper on the advantages and disadvantages of getting a sustainability certification. So like I said, you shared a lot of great information, Jim. Thank you so much for spending time with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great. Okay, all right. So here's information on how to access this white paper. If we learned one thing today, is that certifications are not all the same, and knowing which one to pursue is not cut and dry. So fortunately, that's what we at Softly can help with. You can sign up right here for the white paper, but our primary focus is to really simplify sustainability certification for you. We start by helping you find the best certification for business. We're going to look at your sustainable initiatives, and then what we're going to do is really help you find which one's going to give the best return on your investment by qualifying you for retail and government programs we talked about today and other things. So, this is important. We know it can be really, really confusing. So we're offering a free introductory report, and we do encourage you to please reach out. We also have a platform that will take your message to consumers. It's our personal sustainable shopping assistant. This is a free download. You can get it on the Chrome Web Store or at getsoftly.com. And what we do is we elevate and suggest sustainable products that are certified to be what they say they are to shoppers, using some of the best certifications out there. So Please know also that this is a live webinar, but it's recorded. So you can access this recording later, and it's going to be available on our website. Thank you so much for being with us today. Please join us again for another one of our informational chats. Until then, have a great day, everyone, and tread softly on the world.